He walked into class with nothing but a notebook, yet the teacher stopped mid-sentence, staring him down. "Are you sure you belong here?" The room froze, every eye waiting for him to stumble. But what happened next left the entire class speechless, and the teacher exposed. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The late summer sun spilled across the manicured lawns of Willow Creek High, a suburban school that prided itself on excellence. Its red brick walls and freshly waxed hallways gleamed like a promise. The parking lot filled with sleek cars, SUVs and convertibles, many driven by students who had just earned their licenses. The hum of laughter and chatter filled the air as cliques reassembled, friends reunited, and the small rituals of senior year began. For Marcus Green, the moment carried a different weight. He walked through the double doors with a backpack slung low, eyes sharp but quiet. His sneakers were clean but not brand new, and his shirt neatly pressed by his grandmother the night before spoke of care more than wealth. He wasn't here to flaunt style. He was here to survive, to learn, to push against the invisible ceiling that had always hovered above him. Marcus had always been good with numbers. To him, equations weren't puzzles to be solved. They were languages waiting to be spoken. Patterns fell into place naturally, like melodies in his mind. Where others struggled, he thrived, often seeing solutions before teachers even finished writing them down. But in Willow Creek, brilliance didn't erase skin color. If anything, it made him more noticeable, and not always in a good way. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, scanning the crowded hallway. Posters lined the walls, announcing football tryouts, cheer practice, and upcoming homecoming events. White students clustered in groups, their laughter loud and effortless. A smaller cluster of black students lingered near the cafeteria doors, their voices quieter, their movements deliberate, as though they understood the unspoken rule: don't draw too much attention. Marcus felt that tension in the air, the unacknowledged divide that shaped everything from friendships to class placements. Advanced classes at Willow Creek were overwhelmingly white. The narrative was subtle but persistent. Black students were better suited for general or remedial tracks. Counselors often steered them gently, wrapping low expectations in soft voices. Marcus had felt it when he first requested to join AP Calculus. The counselor had smiled politely, asked twice if he was sure, and suggested he try something more manageable. But Marcus refused. Numbers had never betrayed him, even when people did. So he stood his ground, signed the forms, and now found himself walking toward room 204, the home of AP Calculus. The classroom was spacious, with tall windows that let in the morning light. Rows of desks gleamed, freshly polished, and the scent of dry erase markers lingered in the air. Students filed in, laughing, adjusting their schedules, already comparing notes about summer trips abroad or internships their parents had arranged. Marcus slipped quietly into a seat near the middle, not too far in the back to look disengaged, not too close to seem like he was trying to prove something. He knew the balancing act well. As he settled in, the subtle shift of eyes followed him. Some students glanced, then looked away quickly. Others lingered, whispering behind notebooks. He was the only black student in the room. The silence around that fact wasn't spoken, but it weighed heavy. Marcus pulled out his notebook and pen, focusing on the blank page as though preparing himself for battle. The bell rang, and in walked Mr. Whitaker, the AP Calculus teacher. Tall, graying at the temples, dressed in a pressed button-up shirt and slacks, he carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Parents adored him. Administrators praised his high standards. Students both feared and respected him. He prided himself on weeding out the weak early in the semester, and his reputation for harshness was almost legendary. "Good morning, class," Mr. Whitaker said, his voice booming with authority. "Welcome to AP Calculus. This isn't an easy course. Some of you will rise to the challenge. Some of you will realize you're in over your heads." His eyes swept across the room like a spotlight, gauging reactions, asserting dominance. Marcus kept his gaze on his notebook, steady, unflinching. He'd heard the stories about Whitaker. This was a man who thrived on intimidation, who treated high school like a proving ground for future Ivy Leaguers. Marcus wasn't intimidated. Not yet. Mr. Whitaker began calling roll, pausing occasionally to exchange small talk with familiar students. When he reached Marcus's name, his voice slowed. "Marcus Green," he said, scanning the room. His eyes landed on Marcus, and for a moment, the silence stretched too long. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied evenly. Mr. Whitaker nodded, his expression unreadable, then continued with the list. But Marcus felt the pause like a brand, as though Whitaker had marked him already. The lecture began with an overview of the syllabus. Terms like derivatives, integrals, and limits rolled easily off Whitaker's tongue. He spoke quickly, assuming familiarity, tossing in jokes that catered to students already comfortable with the material. A handful laughed. Marcus took notes diligently, determined not to miss a word. But underneath the routine of the first day lecture, Marcus noticed the dynamics. When white students asked questions, Whitaker encouraged them, praised their curiosity. When a Latina student hesitantly raised her hand, his response was curt, almost dismissive. And when Marcus wrote in his notebook, Whitaker's eyes flickered toward him with a subtle scrutiny, as if waiting for a mistake. The room buzzed with quiet energy, the first day nerves mixing with excitement. But Marcus sat in stillness, focused. He wasn't here to be liked. He was here to prove to himself, to his family, maybe even to the world, that brilliance could not be boxed in. The lecture neared its end when Whitaker paused, setting down his marker. Now, before we wrap up, I'd like to get a sense of where everyone stands, he said. Let's see who's really ready for this course. He scanned the room, eyes sharp. Then deliberately he turned to Marcus. Mr. Green, he said slowly, the corners of his mouth tugging in something between a smile and a smirk. Since you're new to AP Calculus, why don't you come up to the board and show us how you handle a problem? The classroom stilled. Every eye turned toward Marcus. Some smirked. Others widened in surprise. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Was he about to prove he didn't belong? Marcus's pen froze above his notebook. His chest tightened. He could feel the heat of every gaze pressing against him, daring him to stand, daring him to fail. And in that charged silence, the first day of senior year became something more than just a day. It became a test. Would Marcus rise to the challenge? Or had Mr. Whitaker just set him up for humiliation in front of everyone? Marcus rose slowly from his desk, every muscle tight, his hand gripping his pen like an anchor he was forced to let go. He felt the room lean into his hesitation, the shuffle of sneakers against the tiled floor, the muted laughter someone tried to stifle. Whitaker's eyes followed him as he walked toward the whiteboard, a look of calm amusement playing across his face, as though this were some harmless ritual, a bit of theater to test readiness. But Marcus felt the trap beneath the smile. He picked up the marker, standing in front of 20 pairs of expectant eyes. For a second his mind went blank, not because he didn't know calculus, but because he knew what this moment represented. This wasn't just a math problem. It was an evaluation of his right to exist in that seat, in that class, in that space. Whitaker scrawled a problem onto the board with practiced ease, stepping aside. It wasn't an introductory review question. It was advanced, something usually tackled mid-semester. Marcus stared at it, pulse rising. He knew the solution. He could see the steps forming in his head like pieces of a bridge. But every time his marker moved, he felt the weight of the room, waiting for a mistake. He managed to outline the first steps. A murmur ran through the room, a mix of surprise and impatience. Then, before he could continue, Whitaker cut in, his voice sharp but wrapped in false encouragement. Not bad, Whitaker said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But are you sure you understand why you're doing that? Or are you just mimicking steps you've memorized? A few chuckles rippled across the desks. Marcus froze. He hadn't been wrong, but the teacher's interruption planted doubt like poison. He swallowed hard, glanced at his work, and pressed forward, finishing the solution. His answer was correct, precise, clean. For a second the board stood as undeniable proof of his skill. Whitaker tilted his head, arms crossed. Well, he said finally, that's interesting, surprising even. His words were sugar-coated, but the tone carried a subtle sting. Maybe you'll last in this class longer than I expected. The laughter this time was sharper. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Marcus capped the marker and returned to his seat, cheeks burning. He kept his face calm, but inside a quiet humiliation simmered. Whitaker moved on without missing a beat, calling on a blonde-haired boy in the front row. The boy fumbled through a basic derivative, getting lost halfway. Instead of cutting him down, Whitaker leaned in with patience. Good start, Daniel, he said warmly. Think about the chain rule. You almost had it. Excellent effort. Marcus sat still, pen resting on his notebook. The difference in tone was obvious. Encouragement for one, skepticism for another. Praise where mistakes lived. suspicion where brilliance showed. By mid-morning, the dynamic was set. Whitaker peppered the room with questions, tossing them like softballs to the same group of students, most of them white, all of them already used to being praised. Each correct response was met with, "Excellent," or "Good thinking, that's the kind of mind we need in this class." When Marcus raised his hand, the acknowledgement came slower. When he answered correctly, Whitaker's nod was brief, clipped, as though admitting correctness, but withholding approval. When he hesitated once, searching for the right phrasing, Whitaker pounced. "You need to be quicker, Marcus," he said, his smile polite but his tone sharp. "This isn't algebra. If you're going to keep up, you'll need to work harder than you're used to." The words stung more than they should have. Marcus knew he was capable, knew it as well as he knew the rhythm of his own heartbeat. But Whitaker's voice burrowed into the silence, planting seeds of doubt, not only in Marcus's mind, but in the minds of everyone else in the room. At lunch, whispers followed him down the hallway. "He's smart, but do you think he's really that good? Or was it luck? Whitaker's gonna crush him." The voices weren't cruel, just matter of fact, the way stereotypes disguised themselves as casual opinions. Back in class, Marcus kept his focus sharp, every pen stroke deliberate. But beneath his composure, something else stirred, anger mixed with resolve. He wouldn't give Whitaker the satisfaction of seeing him falter. Still, Whitaker's performance continued. Each time Marcus contributed, the teacher reframed it as surprising rather than expected. "Not bad for your first try. Unexpectedly sharp. Well, maybe you'll catch on quicker than I thought." The class laughed less openly now, but the effect remained. Marcus wasn't being treated as a student. He was being treated as an anomaly. Every compliment was a question. Every acknowledgement carried a shadow. After class ended, Marcus lingered, gathering his books slowly. Whitaker approached him at the desk, lowering his voice but not softening his tone. "Marcus," he said, "you did better than I expected today." His eyes held a glint, like someone testing glass for cracks. "But I want to be honest with you. This class isn't for everyone. A lot of students, very capable ones, drop out before midterms. I just don't want you to feel discouraged if it becomes too much. Are you sure you belong here?" The question was wrapped in concern, but Marcus heard the message beneath it. He wasn't being advised. He was being warned. He held Whitaker's gaze for a long moment. Words rose in his throat, but stuck there. He wanted to say, "I belong more than you think. I belong more than anyone here knows." But he bit them back. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I'm sure." Whitaker smiled thinly. "We'll see," he replied, turning away. That night, Marcus sat at his desk, the house quiet, except for the distant hum of his mother's late-night television. His notebook lay open, pages filled with formulas he knew, like second nature. He wasn't angry about the math. It was the one thing that never betrayed him. He was angry about the way a man with power had tried to fold his brilliance into a narrative of doubt. He could hear Whitaker's voice in his head. "Are you sure you belong here?" It echoed not as a question, but as a challenge. The next morning, Marcus returned to room 204, his resolve sharpened. He took his seat, silent but steady. The atmosphere buzzed as Whitaker entered, greeting students warmly, complimenting their homework. Then his eyes found Marcus, and the corners of his mouth twitched. "All right, class," Whitaker announced. "I think we'll start today with a little challenge. Nothing too heavy, just a quick problem set to see who's prepared." He began handing out sheets of paper. The questions weren't review. They were complex, layered, the kind that demanded sharp focus and time. Students groaned, muttering under their breath. But when Whitaker reached Marcus's desk, he placed the paper down slowly, leaning in just enough for Marcus to catch the smirk tugging at his lips. "Let's see if yesterday was just luck," he said softly. Marcus's chest tightened, the air heavy. Around him, students rustled papers and tapped pencils, but the weight of the moment pressed squarely on him. He wasn't just solving equations anymore. He was being dared to fail. Would Marcus's brilliance silence the whispers? Or would Whitaker finally corner him into humiliation in front of everyone? Marcus stared at the problem set in front of him. Pencil tapping against the page, the symbols danced like familiar adversaries, numbers and variables weaving into shapes only he could decipher. Around him, the classroom buzzed with the frustrated sighs of his peers. But he felt none of their impatience, only the heat of Mr. Whitaker's eyes on his back, waiting. The bell finally rang, breaking the spell. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, and the room emptied with the energy of students rushing toward lunch. Marcus packed his sheet carefully, sliding it into his notebook as though protecting it from judgment. He didn't look at Whitaker as he left. He didn't need to. He could feel the teacher's smirk trailing him like a shadow. By the time Marcus made it home that afternoon, the weight of the day had pressed into his shoulders. Their apartment complex sat on the edge of town, where the lawns weren't manicured, and the buildings carried the stains of years without fresh paint. The front door creaked as he pushed it open, the familiar scent of fried onions and detergent greeting him. Inside, his grandmother sat in her recliner by the window, a worn Bible resting on her lap. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, her glasses low on her nose. She looked up as Marcus entered, her eyes warm despite the fatigue etched into her features. "Long day?" she asked, voice gentle. Marcus dropped his bag on the couch, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, first week is always long." She studied him, as if she could see past the words into the storm beneath them. "Remember what I told you, baby. They'll look at you and decide what you're worth before you open your mouth. But you know better. You show them who you are." Her words carried the same weight they always had. Truth forged in experience. She had lived through decades of doors closed, opportunities denied, and yet she sat there still believing in possibility. Marcus nodded, letting her faith in him be a shield. Later, his mother came home, shoulders slumped, uniform smelling faintly of cleaning chemicals. She worked mornings at a diner and evenings at an office building, cleaning rooms that others left messy without thought. She kissed Marcus on the forehead before setting her bag down, exhaustion evident in the way she moved. "How was it?" she asked, slipping off her shoes. Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to burden her with the details. The smirk, the questions, the way Whitaker had turned his brilliance into doubt. But he couldn't lie either. "It was fine," he said carefully. "Hard, but I can handle it." His mother gave him a long look, the kind that measured more than words. "Good, because we've worked too hard for you to be in those classes. Don't let anyone tell you where you belong." Marcus felt the unspoken truth in her words. The long hours she worked weren't just for bills. They were so he could sit in classrooms most people assumed weren't for him. Every dollar saved, every sacrifice made, it was a foundation beneath his feet. After dinner, simple rice and beans, with cornbread his grandmother had baked. Marcus retreated to his room. The small space was lined with stacks of textbooks, some borrowed from the library, others picked up secondhand. His desk was a battlefield of notes, graph paper, and sharpened pencils. He sat down, pulling out the problem set Whitaker had given him. The equations stared back at him, intricate and deliberate. Whitaker hadn't chosen them at random. Marcus could tell. Each problem was designed to consume time, to break confidence, to expose hesitation. It wasn't just a test of math, it was a test of endurance. He bent over the first question, scribbling furiously, working through each layer of complexity. His pencil moved fast, his mind sharper than his body's fatigue. But every time he found the correct answer, Whitaker's voice echoed in his head. "Are you sure you belong here?" The whisper grew louder with each problem, until it wasn't just Whitaker speaking. It was every sideways glance in the hallway, every rumor muttered in the cafeteria, every counselor who had ever suggested he aim lower. He stopped, pressing the pencil to the desk, his chest tight. He thought of his father then, how he had walked out when Marcus was 6, leaving behind promises that turned hollow. For years, Marcus had carried that absence like a weight, wondering if he'd ever be enough. But his grandmother had filled the gap with resilience, teaching him pride in who he was, and his mother had filled it with sacrifice, teaching him the cost of dreams. Failure wasn't an option, not because he feared disappointment, but because too many people had already given too much for him to be there. He glanced toward the small framed photo on his desk, his mother in her diner uniform, smiling despite exhaustion, and his grandmother in her Sunday dress, eyes steady. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "I belong here." The night stretched long. The hum of traffic outside faded, replaced by the creaks of the old building. His mother's door closed. His grandmother's prayers whispered into silence. But Marcus remained at his desk, a solitary figure, under the dim lamp, wrestling numbers that twisted and turned like shadows. By midnight his eyes burned, but he pushed on. The paper in front of him bore smudges of graphite, eraser marks, and calculations that ran into the margins. The room was quiet except for the scratch of his pencil, the steady beat of his determination. And yet, one problem remained, more complex than the rest. It sprawled across the page like a challenge carved in stone. He stared at it, every line of the equation daring him to falter. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his temples. Fatigue weighed heavy, but so did expectation. He thought of Whitaker's smirk, of the laughter that had rippled across the class, of the question asked not just of his intellect, but of his right to exist in that space. His pencil hovered above the page, but his hand didn't move. The equation loomed, impossible and unyielding. The kind of problem that could define whether his brilliance would silence the doubts or fuel them. The night pressed in around him, the clock ticking toward morning. Marcus sat frozen, staring at the impossible calculus assignment that could define his reputation, knowing tomorrow the world would see whether he rose or cracked. The morning sun leaked through the blinds of Marcus's bedroom, slanting across his desk where the problem set still lay unfinished. His head had slumped onto the papers sometime after 2 a.m., and he woke with the faint ache of graphite smudged across his cheek. The final problem remained untouched, its blank solution box a silent taunt. He folded the sheet carefully and slid it into his bag, a mix of exhaustion and dread curling in his stomach. At school, the hallway felt louder than usual. Voices echoed, sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, and Marcus picked up fragments of whispers as he passed clusters of students. A few eyes darted toward him, then away. The previous day's performance, solving that board problem under Whitaker's scrutiny, hadn't faded from memory. To some it was impressive, to others it was suspicious. To Whitaker, it was unfinished business. When Marcus stepped into room 204, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Conversations dropped into hushed tones, and glances flickered his way. He slid into his usual seat, head low, trying to lose himself in the rhythm of unzipping his backpack, pulling out his notebook, lining up his pencil just so. Mr. Whitaker entered, his stride confident, his tie perfectly knotted. He greeted the class with his usual blend of charm and command, making jokes that drew polite laughter from the students in the front row. Then, as if on cue, his eyes landed on Marcus. "Before we begin today," Whitaker announced, clapping his hands once for attention, "I'd like to revisit something from yesterday. A little exercise, just to sharpen our minds." The class groaned, but Whitaker's smile widened. He turned to the whiteboard and began writing, his marker screeching, as symbols sprawled across the smooth surface. This wasn't a warm-up problem. The equations stretched in every direction, long, winding, layered with steps designed to twist and trip even the sharpest student. When he capped the marker and stepped aside, there was a murmur of disbelief. "Is that even solvable?" someone whispered. Whitaker clasped his hands behind his back. "Of course it's solvable," he said smoothly, "but it requires clarity of thought. Let's see who's up for the challenge." His gaze swept the room theatrically, before locking on Marcus. "How about you, Mr. Green?" The words dropped like a stone into silence. Heads turned, eyes fixed on Marcus. Some students leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the show. Others exchanged glances, quietly sympathetic but unwilling to intervene. Marcus's throat tightened. He hadn't touched the last problem on the homework set, one Whitaker had clearly mirrored here on the board. The unspoken message was clear. "You didn't finish it last night. Let's see you fail in front of everyone today." He stood slowly, his legs heavy, and made his way to the front. The marker felt slick in his hand, his palm damp with sweat. Behind him, whispers buzzed like static. "But he can't do it. Watch him choke." Why'd Whitaker pick him again? Marcus faced the board, the equation towering over him. His mind whirred, but under the weight of expectation, the numbers refused to fall neatly into place. His chest pounded, each heartbeat echoing the centuries of voices telling boys like him they weren't meant to be here. Whitaker's voice cut through the silence. "Take your time," he said, but his tone carried no kindness. It was the mockery of patience, the pretense of fairness. Marcus lifted the marker and began. His strokes were shaky at first, his steps hesitant. He laid out the opening moves of the solution, but halfway through, doubt crept in. Was he doing this right? Was he missing something? He paused, staring at the partial work, the silence of the room pressing harder. Behind him, someone chuckled softly. The sound sliced into him. He erased a line, rewrote it, then stopped again. His vision tunneled, the problem looming larger the more he stared at it. He could feel Whitaker's eyes drilling into his back, hungry for the falter, the failure, the proof that brilliance from someone like Marcus was only temporary. The whispers grew. A girl near the window muttered, "See? He doesn't know it." Another voice followed, low but cutting. Knew yesterday was just luck. Marcus's grip on the marker tightened until his knuckles whitened. His breath came shallow, each inhale sharp. He wanted to turn around, to silence them all, to say, "Do you have any idea how hard I've worked? Do you know what it costs me to be here?" But the words remained locked in his chest. Instead, he stared at the half-finished problem, sweat beading along his hairline. He thought of his mother working late into the night, her hands raw from scrubbing floors. He thought of his grandmother praying softly by the window, telling him to show the world who he was. He thought of Whitaker's smirk, the counselor's doubt, the whispers in the hallway. For a moment he wanted to give up, to set down the marker, shrug, and return to his seat, letting the weight crush him. What did it matter? The room had already decided. Then, like a thread pulling him back from the edge, a memory surfaced. His grandmother's voice, steady and unshakable. "They'll tell you you don't belong. They'll try to make you believe it. But numbers don't lie, Marcus, and neither does the truth inside you." The words cut through the noise, through the doubt. His breath slowed, his focus sharpened. He looked at the problem again, and suddenly the pieces shifted. The path forward emerged, faint but clear, like stars breaking through a cloudy night. Marcus lifted the marker again, hands steadier now. He erased the error, began rewriting, each line stronger, surer. The murmurs behind him softened, confusion replacing mockery. Whitaker's smile faded, ever so slightly, just as Marcus is about to complete the solution. The door creaks open, and an unexpected figure steps into the room, changing the entire atmosphere in an instant. The classroom door creaked open, its hinges groaning against the silence. Every head turned toward it, grateful for the distraction from Marcus's faltering steps at the board. In the doorway stood Mrs. Collins, the assistant principal. Her sharp heels clicked as she entered, carrying a clipboard tight against her chest. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor, and for popping into classrooms unannounced, her presence was like an electric current running through the air. Whitaker straightened immediately, his expression snapping from smug amusement to professional composure. "Mrs. Collins," he said with forced warmth. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" She offered a polite smile. "Just making my rounds. Don't mind me." She scanned the room, her eyes briefly landing on Marcus, before shifting back to Whitaker. Marcus's chest tightened. If he failed now, it wouldn't just be in front of his classmates. It would be in front of an administrator, another person to confirm whether he belonged or not. Whitaker gestured casually toward the board. "We're just reviewing a problem. Mr. Green here is giving it a try." The tone in his voice carried an edge, an invitation for Mrs. Collins to witness the unraveling. Marcus could hear it, even if no one else did. He stared at the board again. The equation stretched across it like a mountain, every line daring him to climb. His hand gripped the marker tighter. His grandmother's words echoed once more. "Numbers don't lie, Marcus, and neither does the truth inside you." He inhaled slowly, his shoulders squaring. This time, the numbers didn't blur. They aligned. The pathway became clear. His hand moved steadily, methodically, across the board. First, he corrected his earlier misstep, striking through the error with firm precision. Then, step by step, he unfolded the solution, layer by layer, like peeling back the skin of something hidden. Derivatives led into simplifications. Fractions collapsed. Variables canceled neatly. His strokes grew faster, more confident, until the once overwhelming sprawl of symbols began shrinking, resolving into something manageable. The classroom grew unnervingly quiet. Even the habitual whisperers had stilled. Daniel, the blonde-haired boy in the front, leaned forward, brows furrowed in disbelief. A girl near the window stopped twirling her hair, frozen mid-motion as she watched the answer materialize. Whitaker's posture stiffened, his arms crossed, jaw set, eyes narrowing at the board as if trying to catch Marcus slipping. And then, with a final firm stroke, Marcus boxed the solution at the bottom of the board. The answer sat there clean, undeniable, perfect. He dropped the marker onto the tray, the soft clatter echoing in the silence. The classroom exhaled all at once. A gasp here, a murmur there, but mostly a stunned quiet. The same students who had whispered about his failure now sat frozen, eyes wide, as though they'd just witnessed something they couldn't reconcile with their assumptions. Mrs. Collins raised her eyebrows, impressed despite herself. "That's correct," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. Marcus turned, his gaze sweeping the room. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His brilliance spoke louder than anything else could. A few students exchanged shocked glances. Someone whispered, "No way." Another muttered, "He actually did it." Marcus walked back to his desk, each step steady, his head high. Inside, adrenaline coursed through him, his heart hammering, but outwardly, he kept his composure. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing his nerves. He slid back into his chair, opened his notebook, and picked up his pen, as if the moment hadn't just shifted the atmosphere in the entire room. For a moment, the class remained suspended in silence, every student caught between disbelief and a reluctant awe. And then Whitaker spoke. "Well," he said slowly, his voice carefully measured, "that was unexpected." His smile didn't reach his eyes, but sometimes even a blind squirrel finds a nut. A ripple of awkward laughter ran through the room, thin, uncertain. It wasn't the genuine laughter from before. This was something else, nervous and uneasy. Marcus's chest burned. The dismissal landed heavier than outright mockery. His victory, so painstakingly earned, had been reduced to chance with one cutting remark. Mrs. Collins glanced at Whitaker, her expression unreadable. "I wouldn't call that luck," she said mildly. "That was skill." For a fraction of a second, Whitaker's mask cracked. A flicker of irritation flashed in his eyes, before he smoothed it over. "Of course," he said quickly. "I just mean, we'll see if the consistency holds. One correct answer doesn't make a mathematician." The words hit like stones. Marcus sat motionless, his pen still against the paper. He wanted to push back, to demand recognition, but the rules of the classroom, unwritten but powerful, kept him silent. Around him, students shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided his eyes, ashamed of their earlier whispers. Others glanced at him with something new. Respect, perhaps, or maybe fear of being proven wrong again. But the damage was done. Whitaker had planted the seed. Maybe it was just a fluke. As the lesson continued, Marcus barely heard the lecture. His mind replayed the moment at the board. The silence, the gasp, the victory that should have been his. He had stunned them. He had proved himself. And yet, Whitaker had twisted it, shrinking his triumph into a question mark. When the bell rang, students filed out, buzzing with chatter. Marcus overheard fragments. "He's actually smart. Whitaker's not buying it though. Bet he can't do it twice." Marcus packed his bag slowly, feeling the eyes on him even as the room emptied. Whitaker lingered by the desk, stacking papers with exaggerated calm. He didn't look at Marcus until the room was nearly empty. Then he spoke, his tone low but sharp enough to cut. "Don't get too comfortable, Marcus. This class has a way of revealing who's truly prepared and who's lucky." Marcus met his eyes, silent. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Mrs. Collins, still in the corner, cleared her throat. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her tone edged with quiet disapproval, "I'll be observing more of your sessions this semester, just making sure everything runs smoothly." Whitaker's smile tightened. "Of course." Marcus slung his backpack over his shoulder, stepping out of the room. The hallway felt brighter, noisier, but none of it touched him. Inside, he was still standing at that board, marker in hand, the truth shining clear for everyone to see. But his triumph had been stolen, reframed, dismissed. And he knew Whitaker wasn't finished. Marcus's brilliance had stunned the class. But as he left the room, Whitaker's eyes followed him with a darkness that promised the next trap would be even more brutal. The hallway buzzed like a hive as Marcus stepped out of room 204, his backpack slung heavily over one shoulder. The clamor of voices, lockers slamming, and sneakers squeaking against the linoleum blurred together, but the fragments that cut through were sharp enough to sting. "Did you see that?" one boy whispered. "There's no way he solved that on his own. He had to have cheated somehow," another voice followed. "Probably got help before class." The accusations traveled fast, hopping from one group to the next, like sparks catching dry grass. By the time Marcus reached his locker, the whispers had already grown into a narrative. He spun the combination, jaw tight, pretending not to hear. But the words clung to him. He had done the impossible, written brilliance across that board for all to see. Yet his victory was being rewritten into suspicion. A hand clapped his shoulder lightly. Marcus turned to see Deshaun Carter, a junior he knew vaguely from the basketball team. "Yo, that was crazy what you did," Deshaun said, eyes wide with something close to awe. "Man, I never seen Whitaker look so pressed." Marcus offered a faint smile. "Thanks." But Deshaun added quickly, lowering his voice, You gotta be careful. Don't let them see you as trying to outshine everybody. They don't like that. Marcus frowned. I wasn't trying to outshine anyone. I was just doing the problem. Deshaun shrugged, glancing around as if someone might be listening. Doesn't matter. They'll twist it. Trust me. Just keep your head down, bro. Don't give them a reason. The advice landed heavy, not because it was new, but because it echoed something Marcus had felt his whole life. Keep your head down. Don't draw too much attention. Be exceptional, but not too exceptional. As the day wore on, the story of his bored triumph bent and reshaped itself. To some, Marcus was a genius who had silenced the doubts. To others, he was a fluke. Or worse, a fraud. At lunch he carried his tray through the cafeteria, searching for a place to sit. Conversations swirled around him. I heard Whitaker gave him the answer ahead of time. No, he probably memorized it. No way he did that live. Guess we'll find out when he bombs the next one. Marcus sat with a small group of black students he knew from middle school. They greeted him warmly, their voices low but supportive. You killed it, man, said Tiana Brooks, pushing her braids back over her shoulder. For real, nobody's ever shut Whitaker up like that. But, added Andre Lewis, shaking his head, that teacher's not gonna let it slide. He'll come for you harder next time. You already know how this goes. Marcus stirred the food on his tray, appetite gone. What am I supposed to do? Not answer the questions? Andre leaned in. Sometimes, yeah. They'll crucify you for being too good. Don't give him the satisfaction of making you the target. Deanna shot Andre a look. Or maybe he should keep doing exactly what he's doing. Why should he shrink for them? That's what they want. The debate hung in the air, the cafeteria noise swirling around it. Marcus stayed quiet, caught between the two truths. Every win came with a cost, but every silence did too. That afternoon in the library, Marcus found himself sitting alone at a table, books spread before him. He tried to focus, but the whisper network was alive even there. Two students at the next table leaned close, their voices carrying just enough. He's got to have someone tutoring him. No way he's that smart on his own. Yeah, but who? His mom. Please. She works at that diner, right? The words pierced sharper than the equations on the page. They weren't just questioning his skill, they were questioning his right to hold it. Marcus shut his book, his jaw clenched. He wanted to stand up, to confront them, but he stayed seated. Silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was armor. Still, it didn't stop the sting. By the end of the week, Marcus had become more than just a student. In AP Calculus, he was a symbol. For some, he represented possibility, proof that someone like them could stand toe-to-toe with the best. For others, he was a threat, disrupting the unspoken order of who belonged at the top, and Whitaker knew it. On Friday morning, Whitaker strode into room 204 with unusual energy, carrying a stack of papers under one arm. The class hushed as he set them on the desk, his smile tight, his eyes sharp. All right, everyone, he announced. We're going to do something a little different next week. He began handing out flyers, one to each student. Marcus took his copy, scanning the bold letters at the top. AP Calculus Challenge, class-wide competition. Whitaker clasped his hands. This will be an opportunity for you all to prove your skills in a friendly competition. Teams will be formed, problems will be given, points will be earned, and in the end, the strongest students will rise to the top. A murmur ran through the class, a mix of excitement and dread. Competitions in Whitaker's class were legendary, grueling, high stakes designed to push students to their limits. Whitaker's eyes lingered on Marcus. Of course, he added smoothly, this will also help us see who's consistent, who's truly prepared, and who might have gotten lucky last time. The implication hung heavy, clear enough for everyone to catch. A few students snickered. Others looked at Marcus with something between pity and curiosity. Marcus's chest tightened, but he kept his face calm. He knew exactly what this was. Whitaker wasn't organizing a competition for fairness or learning. He was setting the stage for Marcus's public undoing. After class, as students filed out buzzing with anticipation, Marcus stayed seated, staring at the flyer. His stomach churned, but beneath the unease, something else stirred, a spark of defiance. He folded the paper neatly, slid it into his notebook, and the competition was coming, and Whitaker had made it clear, it wasn't about math anymore. It was about belonging, and Marcus had just been challenged to prove he deserved his seat in front of the entire class. The week leading up to the AP Calculus Challenge buzzed with anticipation. Posters Whitaker had printed out hung on the classroom walls, their bold lettering promising an opportunity to shine. Students whispered in hallways, debating who would dominate the event. To them it was just another academic contest, another chance to prove themselves in the game of rankings that Willow Creek thrived on. But to Marcus, it felt different. Every time Whitaker mentioned the competition, his gaze flickered toward Marcus like a spotlight. This wasn't about sharpening skills, it was about exposure. Marcus could feel it in the way classmates laughed too loudly when Whitaker hinted about luck, in the way conversations hushed when he walked past. By Monday, the day of the competition, Marcus carried that weight like armor. He walked into room 204 with his notebook tucked under his arm, his steps measured, his face calm. But inside, nerves buzzed sharp as electricity. The classroom had been rearranged. Desks were grouped into clusters, each forming a team. On the board, Whitaker had drawn brackets, like a tournament chart. Names filled the spaces. Daniel's team, Jessica's team, Brian's team. And then on the far right, Marcus's name stood alone. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Wait, he doesn't have a team? Guess nobody wanted him. Or maybe Whitaker planned it that way. Marcus stared at the board, his stomach tightening. He had expected to be paired, expected to compete like everyone else. But there it was, his name, isolated, separate. Whitaker turned to the class with his most charming smile. Now, to make things interesting, I've decided Marcus will compete solo. After all, he's already shown himself to be exceptional, hasn't he? His tone was silk, but the barbs were sharp enough to draw blood. A few students chuckled nervously. Others avoided looking at Marcus at all. Marcus kept his face impassive, though his hands tightened into fists beneath the desk. Competing alone meant he would have to solve every problem, without support while the other groups divided the work. It wasn't just harder, it was nearly impossible, and Whitaker knew it. The first round began. Sheets of problems were distributed, and students bent over their desks, pencils flying. The room filled with the sound of scratching graphite and the occasional frustrated sigh. Marcus worked quickly, his mind slicing through the equations, every solution precise. While other groups huddled in whispers, debating approaches, he moved alone, steady and sure. By the end of the round, he had finished every problem. He handed in his sheet with quiet confidence, ignoring the doubtful glances that followed. When Whitaker read out the scores, Marcus was at the top. A murmur swept through the room, surprised disbelief, reluctant admiration. Marcus caught a few glances, some wide-eyed with respect, others narrowed with resentment. Whitaker's smile didn't falter, but his eyes darkened. "Well done, Marcus," he said smoothly. "Let's see if you can keep it up." Round after round, the pattern repeated. Marcus outpaced every team, his answers sharp and clean. Each victory should have been enough to silence the whispers, but instead it only sharpened them. "He's too fast. Nobody's that good." Whitaker gave him the answers. Something's not right. By the final round, tension gripped the room like a vice. Whitaker stood at the board, marker in hand, his smile tight. "Now for the deciding challenge," he announced. "A problem that will truly separate the prepared from the lucky." He scrawled an enormous equation across the board, its complexity stunning even the strongest students. Gasps rippled through the room. "That's impossible. No way we can solve that in time." Whitaker capped the marker, stepping aside. "Teams may collaborate as usual. Marcus, since you're on your own, you'll have to show your full process at the board. Every step, no skipping ahead." Marcus's chest tightened. Forcing him to write it live wasn't just about difficulty, it was about exposure. Any hesitation, any pause, would be magnified. He rose slowly, the room silent, except for the shuffle of papers. Marker in hand, he faced the sprawling problem. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, but his mind clicked into rhythm. Piece by piece, he laid the foundation. Derivatives, substitutions, simplifications. The board filled with his work, each line building toward clarity. Behind him, the whispers shifted. "Wait, he's actually doing it. No way. This can't be real." Whitaker's jaw tightened as the solution emerged. He leaned against his desk, arms crossed, eyes narrowing with every correct step. Finally, Marcus drew the last line, boxing the answer with steady precision. He dropped the marker, breath heavy but controlled. The board glowed with undeniable truth. Silence. Then a gasp. A murmur. The impossible had been done. Marcus turned, his gaze sweeping the room. Doubt had drained from their faces, replaced by awe. Even those who had whispered loudest sat stunned. But Whitaker didn't clap. He didn't nod. His smile stretched thin, brittle. "Well," he said finally, voice cold. "That's an interesting attempt, but I'm afraid it doesn't count." The room erupted in confusion. "What? Why not?" "He got it right." Whitaker raised a hand for silence. Marcus broke the rules. He skipped justification on one of his steps. The instructions were clear. Every step must be explained fully. Without that, the solution is invalid. Marcus's stomach dropped. He replayed the problem in his head. He hadn't skipped a step. He had condensed it, written it in shorthand, something every advanced student did. But Whitaker had built the trap carefully, ensuring he could twist it against him. Marcus's voice came out low but firm. "That's not true. I showed every necessary part." Whitaker's eyes gleamed. "Necessary to you, perhaps. But this competition is about precision. Rules matter, Marcus. And in this case, you broke them." The room buzzed with whispers, disbelief, arguments. Some students looked outraged on his behalf. Others smirked, satisfied with Whitaker's ruling. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of it crashing over him. He had been perfect. He had silenced every doubt. And still, it wasn't enough. As Marcus stared at Whitaker's smug face, the truth sank in. The battle wasn't about math anymore. The system itself had turned against him. The classroom was still buzzing when the final bell rang, the murmur of protests and disbelief echoing even as students shuffled their papers. Some lingered near the door, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Marcus solving the impossible, then being dismissed with a technicality. Others left quickly, shaking their heads, eager to distance themselves from the tension that hung heavy in the air. Marcus stayed rooted to his desk, his hands clenched into fists under the table. He replayed every step of the solution in his mind, certain he had followed the rules, certain he had shown his work. Yet Whitaker's ruling had been final, his voice carrying the weight of authority no student could override. "Marcus," Whitaker said coolly as he packed his briefcase, "I'll need you to stop by the principal's office after school. We can't have defiance and dishonesty disrupting the integrity of this class." Marcus looked up sharply. "Dishonesty?" Whitaker adjusted his tie. "Yes. You misrepresented your work, and then argued my ruling in front of your peers. That's a breach of respect. The administration will decide the next steps." The words hit like a hammer. Dishonesty. Disrespect. He hadn't lied, hadn't cheated, hadn't disobeyed, but Whitaker's tone made it sound indisputable. By the time Marcus walked into the main office, his chest was tight, his throat dry. The secretary glanced up, her polite smile stiffening when she saw who it was. "Mr. Green, the principal is expecting you." He sat in the waiting chair outside the door, staring at the sterile walls lined with framed diplomas and achievement certificates. The hum of the office printer, the muted ring of the phone, all of it felt distant against the pounding of his heartbeat. The door opened. "Marcus, come in." Principal Harris sat behind his broad mahogany desk, his expression carefully neutral. He was a tall man in his 50s, with neatly combed hair and a reputation for being fair but firm. Parents praised him, staff respected him, but Marcus had always felt a quiet distance, as though the principal's fairness didn't always stretch as far as it claimed. Mr. Whitaker was already there, standing to one side, arms folded, his face the picture of professional concern. "Marcus," Harris began, "Mr. Whitaker has raised some serious concerns about your behavior in AP Calculus. He tells me you've been argumentative and failed to follow clear instructions during the competition today." Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's not true. I solved the problem exactly the way we've been taught. I didn't skip anything important." Whitaker interjected smoothly. "With all due respect, Marcus, you condensed a step. You didn't justify it fully. And when I explained the rules, you contradicted me in front of the entire class." Marcus turned to Harris. "I wasn't being disrespectful. I was just explaining that my answer was right." Harris steepled his fingers. "Marcus, intent doesn't erase impact. In a classroom, respect for authority is essential. If a teacher rules that a solution is incomplete, arguing it only undermines the learning environment." Marcus's chest burned. Authority, respect. The words rolled easily off the principal's tongue, but they cut into Marcus like blades. He hadn't been arguing for pride. He'd been arguing for truth. Before he could respond, the door opened again. His mother stepped in, her face tight with exhaustion and fire. She had come straight from work, her uniform still smelling faintly of coffee and grease. She looked at her son first, then at the men seated before him, her eyes narrowing. "I got your message," she said flatly, her voice edged with steel. "Now what exactly are you accusing my son of?" Harris gestured for her to sit. "Mrs. Green, thank you for coming. We're concerned about Marcus's conduct in AP Calculus. Mr. Whitaker feels he's been dishonest in his work and disrespectful in class." Her eyebrows shot up. "Dishonest? My son?" She shook her head sharply. "Marcus has been gifted with numbers since he was little. He doesn't need to cheat, and he doesn't lie. If anything, he's been working harder than anyone just to keep his place in that classroom." Whitaker's voice was calm, almost soothing. "I understand you want to believe that, but this course is rigorous. Sometimes students who aren't truly ready resort to cutting corners." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Mrs. Green's eyes flashed. "So let me get this straight. My son solves problems none of your other students can. And instead of giving him credit, you call it cheating? You call it disrespect?" Harris raised a hand, his tone diplomatic. "Mrs. Green, we're not saying he cheated. We're saying he disregarded the rules, and then challenged his teacher's authority. That can't be allowed, regardless of his ability." The phrase landed heavy, regardless of his ability. It wasn't about whether Marcus was right. It was about whether he had stayed in his place. Marcus sat silently, his throat burning as his mother fought for him. But he could see it, the way Harris's eyes softened for Whitaker, the way the principal leaned toward the teacher's version of events without question. His mother's voice trembled with fury. "You'll excuse me for not trusting a system that's been doubting my boy from the day he walked in here. Don't dress it up as policy. Call it what it is. You don't believe he belongs." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Harris shifted uncomfortably, but didn't respond. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Here's what we'll do. Marcus will remain in AP Calculus for now. But if there are any further incidents, any failure to follow instructions, any sign of disrespect, he will be removed from the course. Permanently." Whitaker's lips curved almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Green leaned forward, her voice low but fierce. "So you're threatening to punish him, not because he's wrong, but because he had the nerve to be right. Do you hear yourselves?" Neither man answered. The meeting ended with stiff goodbyes, Harris insisting the school only wanted what was best, Whitaker thanking the principal for his support. As Marcus and his mother stepped out into the hallway, the silence between them was heavy. She placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing hard. "Baby, you keep doing what you do. Don't let them break you. You hear me?" Marcus nodded, his chest tight, but inside he knew the truth. This wasn't just about a teacher anymore. It was about the system itself, lined up neatly against him. Principal Harris's final words echoed in Marcus's mind. One more slip, one more incident, and he would be thrown out of AP Calculus, unless he found a way to prove himself differently. His future in the class, and maybe beyond, was hanging by a thread. The week after the meeting in Principal Harris's office felt heavier than any Marcus had endured before. Every time he walked into room 24, he felt the invisible pressure tightening as if the walls themselves were waiting for him to slip. Whitaker didn't need to raise his voice anymore. His silence, his smirks, his deliberate pauses whenever Marcus answered were enough to remind everyone of the unspoken warning. One mistake, one misstep, one moment of defiance, and Marcus would be removed from AP Calculus. But Marcus didn't quit. Each night he worked through problem sets until his eyes burned, filling notebooks with equations, covering margins with proofs. His mother would check in with weary eyes after long shifts, urging him to sleep, but he shook his head. "If I stop," he said once, his voice raw, "he wins." It was during one of those late afternoons, long after the regular bell had rung, that the unexpected happened. Marcus had stayed behind in the library, working at a corner table piled with textbooks. The room was nearly empty, just the librarian shelving books, and two students whispering over laptops. As Marcus bent over a particularly dense calculus problem, he began muttering to himself, the way he always did when his focus deepened. If the derivative of the inner function cancels the coefficient here, then substitution leads to symmetry. But the limit won't converge unless you shift the interval, a voice interrupted gently. Marcus looked up, startled. A man in his 40s stood near the table, dressed in a blazer slightly frayed at the elbows, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed. He carried a worn leather satchel, and his eyes held the kind of intensity Marcus recognized instantly. Someone who lived inside numbers the way he did. "Sorry," the man said, offering a small smile. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I just couldn't help noticing you were tackling something advanced." Marcus hesitated. "I was just working through some practice." The man pulled a chair from the next table. "Do you mind?" Marcus shrugged, unsure what else to say. The man sat, glancing at the sheet in front of Marcus. His eyebrows lifted. "This isn't practice from your class, is it? This is college-level material. Who gave you this?" Marcus shook his head. "Nobody. I found it online. I just like the challenge." For a moment, the man studied him, then extended his hand. "I'm Dr. Rafael Alvarez, visiting professor of mathematics at the State University. I'm here for a few weeks, consulting on curriculum development." Marcus blinked. "You're a professor?" Alvarez chuckled. "Guilty as charged, and you, my friend, are clearly more than just a high school senior grinding through assignments. Walk me through this." At first Marcus hesitated, but then the familiar rhythm took over. He explained his process, pointing to each line, showing where he'd condensed steps. His voice grew steadier as he spoke, his mind alive in a way it rarely felt during Whitaker's class. Alvarez listened, nodding, occasionally asking sharp questions. "Why did you substitute there instead of expanding? What happens if the coefficient isn't symmetric? Can you justify that cancellation?" Marcus answered each one without flinching. By the time he boxed the solution, his nerves had faded, replaced by a quiet exhilaration. Alvarez leaned back, whistling softly. "Do you know how rare this is? Most students your age couldn't even read this problem, let alone solve it. You're not just good, Marcus, you're gifted." The words hit Marcus like a rush of air after being underwater too long. For weeks, all he'd heard were doubts, accusations, threats. To hear someone recognize his talent, without twisting it into suspicion, felt almost unreal. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly. Alvarez leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. Don't let one teacher, or even one school, define you. Your gift is bigger than this classroom. Bigger than Whitaker. Bigger than Willow Creek. People will try to cage brilliance because it scares them. Don't let them succeed." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. He thought of his grandmother's words, his mother's sacrifices, and now this stranger, this professor, echoing the same truth. "Do you really think I could do more?" Marcus asked, his voice almost trembling. Alvarez smiled. "I don't think it. I know it. In fact," he reached into his satchel, pulling out a folded brochure. "There's a math symposium next month at the university. Bright young minds from across the state gather to tackle complex problems, share solutions, and get exposure to professors and researchers. It's competitive, but I think you'd thrive there." Marcus stared at the brochure. The glossy images of lecture halls and groups of students bent over whiteboards. It felt like a window into a world he had only glimpsed from a distance. But Alvarez added, his tone shifting, "You'll need Whitaker to sign off on your recommendation. Symposium rules require endorsement from a current math teacher." The hope flickered. Marcus knew exactly what that meant. Whitaker would never endorse him willingly. Alvarez seemed to read his hesitation. "I know you've had difficulties. I overheard enough whispers walking through the halls to understand there's tension. But talent like yours can't stay hidden. You just need to get through his next exam. Prove beyond question that your work is your own. Then he can't deny you." Marcus looked down at the brochure again, the weight of possibility pressing into his hands. He could almost see it standing in a lecture hall surrounded by people who valued his mind, instead of doubting it. But he could also see Whitaker's face, smug and relentless, waiting for the first chance to strip it all away. Alvarez placed a hand on the table, firm but encouraging. "Don't let him shrink you. If you survive his exam, I'll make sure you get that symposium invitation. That's a promise." Marcus nodded slowly, his pulse quickening. For the first time in weeks, hope sparked inside him. Not the fragile kind whispered by family to keep him steady, but the solid kind. The kind that came from someone who had seen, measured, and declared his brilliance real. As Alvarez stood to leave, he paused. "One more thing, Marcus. You've got a gift, yes. But gifts mean nothing without courage. Don't let fear silence you." Marcus watched him walk away, the words echoing in his chest. Marcus clutched the brochure, hope burning in his hands. But he knew the path forward ran straight through Whitaker's final exam, the very trap designed to break him. The brochure still sat folded in Marcus's backpack, its glossy edges worn from him opening and closing it late at night. Every time he looked at it, hope flickered, bright but fragile. Dr. Alvarez's words replayed in his mind. Don't let him shrink you. But inside the walls of Willow Creek High, the shrinking felt constant. The more Marcus proved himself in Whitaker's class, the more invisible lines drew around him. Students who once chatted easily with him now kept their distance, their laughter quieter when he passed. At lunch he noticed spaces at his usual table opening wider, friends sliding their trays elsewhere. You know it's not personal, Andre muttered one day, catching Marcus's eye before leaving the table. It's just, people don't want the drama. You get it, right? Marcus nodded stiffly, though his throat tightened. He got it. Standing too close to him meant inheriting the target Whitaker had painted on his back. Even teachers outside the math department seemed different. His English teacher, who once praised his essays, now hesitated before giving feedback, her voice careful. His history teacher stopped calling on him. As often, it was as if his brilliance had turned radioactive, too powerful to touch without consequence. The silence pressed hardest in the evenings. At home, his grandmother reminded him of his strength, and his mother reminded him of his purpose. But when his door closed, when the house grew quiet, the loneliness swelled. He bent over his desk, solving problem after problem, not because he loved the work, but because it felt like the only thing holding him together. One night, exhaustion overtook him. His pencil slipped from his fingers, and his head sank onto the desk. For a moment, the dam inside him cracked. He pressed his palms to his eyes, his shoulders trembling. The thought surfaced unbidden, sharp and dangerous. What if I just quit? He imagined the relief, walking into the counselor's office, dropping AP calculus, stepping out of Whitaker's shadow. No more stares, no more whispers, no more battles he didn't ask for. Just quiet, just peace. But then as quickly as the thought came, another voice rose, his grandmother's, firm and steady. They'll tell you you don't belong. Don't you dare believe them. Marcus lifted his head slowly, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. The thought of quitting lingered, poisonous, but so did the faces of his family. His mother's tired smile, his grandmother's unwavering faith. Dr. Alvarez's certainty. He couldn't quit, not when so many had sacrificed for him to stand where he was. The next morning, Marcus walked into the crowded hallway with heavy steps. He went to his locker, spinning the dial, his mind already focused on the day ahead. But when he opened the door, his breath caught. Inside, on the top shelf, sat a spiral notebook he didn't recognize. Its cover was plain, the edges worn. Slowly, he lifted it out, heart pounding. He opened to the first page, and froze. Scrawled across it was a grotesque caricature of him. Exaggerated and cruel, his skin shaded darker than ink, his lips drawn thick and clownish, his hair wild and messy. Beneath the drawing, in jagged letters, were the words "A pay, always pretending." Marcus's stomach twisted. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages. Each one carried another image, each worse than the last. Him with chains, him in a janitor's uniform, him kneeling while white classmates stood tall. Page after page, the notebook mocked not his math skills but his very existence. The hallway noise faded into a dull roar. He couldn't breathe. A voice snickered behind him. Guess somebody finally said what we're all thinking. Marcus spun, but the group of students nearby scattered, their laughter trailing down the hall. He clutched the notebook to his chest, rage and humiliation colliding, until his vision blurred. This wasn't just about Whitaker anymore. This was the school itself. The whispers given form, the doubt given ink. He slammed the locker shut, the echo reverberating down the hall. His heart pounded, his throat burned, and for the first time the weight felt unbearable. As Marcus stood frozen with the hateful notebook in his hands, one thought seared into his mind. If they were willing to attack him like this in secret, what would Whitaker do to him next in the open? Marcus carried the hateful notebook home in silence, his backpack heavier than it had ever felt. He didn't show it to anyone on the bus. He didn't speak a word as he walked up the cracked sidewalk toward his apartment. His grandmother was in her usual chair by the window, Bible in hand, and his mother was already home from her first shift, resting her aching feet in slippers. When he dropped the notebook on the table, their faces tightened instantly. His mother flipped through the pages slowly, her jaw hardening with every ugly drawing. His grandmother closed her eyes, whispering something under her breath. that Marcus couldn't hear. "This is what they think of me," Marcus said, his voice low, shaking. "It doesn't matter how many problems I solve. It doesn't matter how hard I work. This is all they'll see." His mother slammed the notebook shut. "No," she said sharply. "Don't you dare believe that." Marcus looked up, his eyes burning. "Then what am I supposed to do? Keep taking it? Keep letting them humiliate me? I can't even walk into class without feeling like I'm already guilty." His mother leaned forward, her voice steady but fierce. "You fight back. Not with anger, not with fists, but with dignity. That's what they don't expect. That's what they can't take away from you." Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that dignity could stand against the cruelty of whispers and the power of men like Whitaker. But the notebook sat there like evidence, daring him to hope. His grandmother opened her eyes, her voice soft but unwavering. "Baby, you carry more than yourself when you walk into that classroom. You carry us. You carry everyone who was told they didn't belong. So when you stand there, you don't just stand for you. You stand for all of us." The words cut through his doubt, carving a space for something else to take root. Resolve. That night, Marcus sat at his desk, the notebook pushed aside. He pulled out blank sheets of paper and filled them with equations, one after another, until the pages piled high. His pencil scratched like a drumbeat, steady, relentless. He wasn't just studying anymore, he was preparing for war. For the next week he lived in silence. At school he kept his head down, ignoring the whispers that still trailed him. At home he solved problem sets until his eyes ached, fueled not by fear but by anger sharpened into purpose. His mother watched him from the doorway sometimes, pride and worry mixing in her gaze. The students of Willow Creek knew something was coming. Whitaker had announced the date of the final exam, and word spread like wildfire. Marcus Green's reckoning was near. That he won't last. Whitaker's gonna crush him. Or maybe he'll pull it off again. The anticipation hummed in the air, in the cafeteria, on the bus, in the locker room. Everyone was waiting to see if Marcus would rise or finally break. Whitaker fed the tension with subtle remarks. In class, he reminded students of the exam's importance, glancing at Marcus as he spoke. "This test will separate those who truly understand calculus from those who merely play at it." His tone was sweetened with charm, but his eyes told another story. By the night before the exam, Marcus's nerves throbbed like a live wire. He stared at his notes, equations blurring together, his mind restless. His mother entered quietly, setting a mug of tea beside him. "You're ready," she said simply. Marcus shook his head. "What if he twists it again? What if it doesn't matter how good I am?" She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then you make it matter. You do what you've always done. You show them the truth, even when they refuse to see it. That's how you win, Marcus. Not just with answers, but with strength." He nodded slowly, letting her words settle deep. He didn't need Whitaker's approval. He needed to prove once and for all that his brilliance couldn't be erased. The next morning, the halls of Willow Creek buzzed with anticipation. Students whispered as Marcus walked past, some smirking, others watching with quiet respect. His steps were heavy but steady, each one carrying the weight of expectation. When he entered room 204, the atmosphere was charged. Desks were spaced neatly, exam packets stacked on Whitaker's desk. The teacher stood at the front, his tie perfectly knotted, his smile thin. "Good morning, everyone," Whitaker said, his voice warm but laced with something sharper. "Today is the day. Your final exam in AP Calculus. This test will determine not only your grades, but also who among you is truly prepared for higher mathematics." He let the words linger before turning his gaze directly on Marcus. "And for some of you it may determine whether you belong here at all." A ripple moved through the class, eyes flicking toward Marcus. He kept his face still, his hands folded on the desk. Whitaker began passing out exam packets. Students murmured nervously as they flipped pages, scanning dense problems. Marcus opened his own packet, his pencil poised. But then, just as the class settled into silence, Whitaker spoke again. "Oh, one more thing," he said casually, as if it were an afterthought. "To ensure fairness, I've decided that one student will solve their problem live, at the board for the entire class to see." He paused, his eyes locking on Marcus like a predator. "Marcus, that student will be you." The room went silent. Students turned, their faces a mix of shock and anticipation. Marcus felt the blood drain from his cheeks, his heart hammering in his chest. This wasn't just an exam anymore. It was a spectacle. As Marcus rose from his seat, every eye fixed on him. He knew the moment had come. Either he would prove his brilliance for all to see, or Whitaker would finally succeed in breaking him. The air in room 2-4 felt thick. Every breath waited as Marcus pushed his chair back. The scrape of its legs against the tile echoed too loudly, like a warning bell. He rose slowly, steadying himself, though his pulse thundered in his ears. The entire class watched in silence, some with pity, some with suspicion, others with something he couldn't quite name. Mr. Whitaker leaned against his desk, arms folded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He didn't need to say it. The smirk said enough. This is where you break. Marcus picked up the piece of chalk Whitaker had placed on the tray. It felt small and fragile in his hand, yet heavier than anything he had ever held. He turned to the sprawling problem written across the board, the symbols long and merciless. Whitaker hadn't chosen something from the exam packet. This was different, tailored, designed specifically to expose him. He exhaled slowly. Then he began. At first the chalk scratched hesitantly, outlining the basic structure of the problem. His hands trembled slightly, but as he worked, something shifted. The rhythm returned, the rhythm he had drilled into himself night after night, the rhythm that had become his second heartbeat. Step by step the problem unfolded. The room stayed unnervingly quiet. Students leaned forward in their seats, pencils idle, papers forgotten. Even the usual whisperers were silent, their curiosity outweighing their mockery. Marcus worked with precision, each line of chalk deliberate, confident. Where others would have stumbled, he flowed. Where shortcuts tempted, he resisted, laying out every justification clearly. His strokes became firmer, his movements steadier, until the once intimidating sprawl of symbols began to resolve into something almost beautiful. He paused only once, closing his eyes briefly. In that moment he heard his grandmother's voice again. Numbers don't lie, Marcus. Neither does the truth inside you. The words steadied his hand. He pressed on. Behind him, the tension built. Jessica, one of the top students, whispered under her breath. He's actually doing it. Daniel leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as if trying to catch the trick. A few students glanced at each other, their disbelief shifting slowly into awe. Whitaker's smirk faltered. He shifted in his seat, arms uncrossing, eyes narrowing as Marcus filled the board with undeniable logic. Finally, with a firm stroke, Marcus drew a box around the final answer. The room seemed to exhale all at once. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then came the gasp. It wasn't just correct. It was elegant. Marcus hadn't just solved the problem. He had revealed it, stripped it down to its simplest, most graceful truth. Holy, someone whispered, trailing off. Perfect, another muttered almost in disbelief. Marcus stepped back, lowering the chalk to the tray. His chest heaved, his palms damp, but his face remained calm. He turned to the class not with arrogance, but with quiet defiance. For the first time, the whispers weren't mocking. They were stunned. Unreal. I've never seen it done that clean. That's genius. Whitaker rose slowly, his expression carefully composed. He approached the board, eyes scanning the solution line by line. The pause stretched, heavy, as though the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable acknowledgement. But instead of praise, Whitaker's lips curled into that same brittle smile. Well, he said finally, his tone smooth but sharp. That was impressive. Almost too impressive. The room stirred. Confused glances darted back and forth. Whitaker tapped the chalk against the board lightly. You must have memorized this. That's the only explanation. No high school student could solve this problem so flawlessly without prior exposure. The words dropped like a stone. Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus froze. Memorized? He repeated, his voice low, incredulous. Whitaker nodded calmly, his tone feigning reason. Yes, you probably came across this problem in one of your late-night study sessions. Found the solution online. Committed it to memory. That would explain the elegance. Students shifted uneasily. Some frowned. Others whispered again, this time uncertain. Could he have? No, but maybe. Marcus's chest tightened. His triumph, pure and undeniable, was being twisted into suspicion before his very eyes. It wasn't enough to be brilliant. Whitaker was determined to make even brilliance look fraudulent. He took a step forward, his voice steady though his hands trembled. I didn't memorize it. I solved it. You watched me. Whitaker raised a brow. Anyone can replicate a memorized solution with enough practice. What we saw here wasn't natural problem solving. It was performance. The words stung sharper than any insult. The class buzzed with confusion, caught between the evidence they had witnessed and the authority of the man dismissing it. Marcus's eyes scanned the room, landing on faces that had doubted him, on those who now looked ashamed, on those who were still undecided. He wanted to scream, to demand justice, but his voice came out quiet, almost trembling. "You'll never admit I belong here, will you?" The silence that followed was heavier than any chalk mark on the board. Whitaker's smile deepened, and he announced that Marcus's performance would require further scrutiny. His entire exam would now be audited for signs of dishonesty. The words "further scrutiny" hung in the air like a blade, suspended above Marcus's head. Whitaker's voice, smooth and professional, carried the authority of someone accustomed to never being questioned. "Your exam will be reviewed," Whitaker said firmly, his hands clasped behind his back. "We can't afford to let dishonesty taint the integrity of this course. If your work checks out, fine. But if not," his pause was deliberate, cruel, "then we'll have no choice but to take corrective action." A low murmur spread across the room. Students shifted in their seats, exchanging looks that ranged from disbelief to unease. Marcus stood frozen, the chalk dust still on his fingertips, his victory slipping through his grasp. He had done everything right, and still the narrative was being rewritten. Just as the silence threatened to smother him, the classroom door opened, the hinges groaned, and every head turned. In stepped Dr. Rafael Alvarez. His blazer was the same worn one Marcus remembered from the library, his satchel slung across his shoulder. His sharp eyes swept the room, immediately sensing the tension. "Am I interrupting?" Alvarez asked calmly, though his voice carried an edge. Whitaker blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "And you are?" "Dr. Alvarez. I'm visiting from the State University," he said smoothly, pulling a folded letter from his satchel. "Here on official business with your administration." But I couldn't help overhearing something troubling as I walked past. The class stirred. Whitaker's polished demeanor faltered for a split second before he forced a smile. "We're in the middle of an exam. Perhaps you can come back later." Alvarez's eyes flicked to Marcus, then to the board, where the elegant solution still glowed in chalk. "I see. And this young man?" Whitaker's voice sharpened. "He's being evaluated for dishonesty. We have reason to believe his performance wasn't authentic." A ripple of disbelief spread through the class. Marcus's throat tightened, but Alvarez's gaze remained steady. He stepped closer to the board, scanning Marcus's work. "Impressive," Alvarez murmured. He turned, his tone suddenly louder. "You are accusing him of memorization?" Whitaker straightened. "Precisely. The solution is too polished, too advanced. No high schooler could produce this without prior exposure." Alvarez paused, then looked directly at Whitaker. "Then solve it yourself." The room went still. Whitaker blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're the teacher," Alvarez said evenly. "If this solution is so suspicious, prove it. Work the problem on the board. Show your students the process you claim was impossible for him." The silence cracked into murmurs. Students leaned forward, eyes wide. Whitaker's smile stiffened. "That's hardly necessary. I've already graded countless papers, guided countless students." "Then it should be simple for you," Alvarez interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Go on. We'll wait." Marcus's heart pounded. His classmates stared at Whitaker, curiosity mingled with anticipation. For the first time, the balance of power shifted. Whitaker hesitated, chalk in hand. He turned to the board, his posture rigid. He began scribbling the first steps, his lines hurried, less precise than Marcus's had been. His back tensed as he erased and rewrote. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. Minutes stretched. The room grew restless. Whispers began to build. "He's stuck. He doesn't know it. Wait. He's doing it wrong." Whitaker's movements grew sharper, his frustration mounting. He reached a dead end, paused, then tried a different path. Another dead end. His hand froze mid-stroke, the chalk trembling slightly. Alvarez's voice cut through the tension. "Strange. The student solved it cleanly in under 20 minutes, and yet the teacher struggles." A laugh escaped from somewhere in the back of the room. Then another. Soon murmurs turned into open whispers, the disbelief now aimed squarely at Whitaker. Whitaker spun around, his face flushed. "Enough. This is highly irregular. I don't need to prove myself to anyone." Alvarez stepped closer, his tone razor sharp. You demanded the student prove himself in front of everyone. Why should you, the authority, be exempt? The class erupted with low cheers, murmurs of agreement. For the first time, Marcus saw eyes looking at him not with doubt, but with vindication. Whitaker's mask cracked fully now. His voice rose, defensive. This is my classroom, my rules. I will not be undermined by truth? Alvarez cut in. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of finality. Because that's what we just witnessed. A truth you tried to bury. Whitaker faltered, his mouth opening and closing without words. The silence that followed was damning. Principal Harris appeared at the door, drawn by the commotion. His eyes swept the room, confusion knitting his brow. What's going on here? Alvarez turned smoothly. What's going on is that a brilliant young man has been accused unfairly, humiliated repeatedly, and forced to prove himself under impossible standards, all while his teacher cannot match the very work he claims was fraudulent. Gasps filled the room. Marcus's classmates leaned in, their eyes darting between Alvarez and Whitaker. Harris stiffened. That's a serious allegation. Alvarez held his gaze. So is accusing a student of dishonesty without evidence? I suggest the board review this immediately. If integrity is what matters, then let's test everyone by the same standard. The room buzzed with energy. Students who had once whispered against Marcus now stared at him with something different. Respect, even admiration. The narrative had shifted before their eyes. Whitaker, red-faced, slammed the chalk onto the tray. This is absurd. This man has no authority here. Authority? Alvarez echoed. Authority doesn't erase hypocrisy. And hypocrisy doesn't erase talent. The words landed like thunder. Whitaker stood frozen, his authority crumbling under the weight of exposure. Marcus sat silently at his desk, his heart pounding. For the first time, he wasn't the one fighting. Someone else, someone who saw him clearly, had stepped into the arena. Principal Harris's face tightened. We'll discuss this further with the school board. His tone was clipped, but the unease in his eyes betrayed him. The class erupted as the bell rang. Students pouring into the hall, their voices carrying the story already. Within minutes, what had happened in room 204 would spread through the school like wildfire. Marcus gathered his things slowly, the adrenaline still coursing through him. For the first time in weeks, he felt lighter, but he also knew the fight wasn't over. As Marcus stepped into the hall, he overheard a teacher whisper to another. The board's already meeting about this. If it goes public, the whole school could be exposed. The story spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the day, everyone at Willow Creek High knew what had happened in room 204. Students who hadn't even been there repeated the scene as if they had. How Marcus solved the impossible problem. How Whitaker stumbled. How Doc Alvarez cut him down with precision. By evening, the story left the school. A parent posted about it on Facebook. Her words sharp. Why is a teacher allowed to accuse a black student of cheating? Simply because he's brilliant. Where's the accountability? The post gained dozens of shares, then hundreds. Within days, local media picked it up. A headline appeared in the town's newspaper. High school teacher accused of targeting black student in calculus class. News vans parked outside the school. Reporters with microphones waiting at dismissal. Students craned their necks to catch a glimpse, whispering as Marcus walked quickly to the bus. His hoodie pulled up, his backpack heavy. Marcus hated the cameras. He hated the way strangers called his name, shouting questions about what it felt like to be a victim. He hadn't wanted fame. He had wanted fairness. But now his story belonged to more than him. It had become a flashpoint. Some students approached him with quiet admiration. You showed him, one girl whispered in the hallway. You proved everybody wrong. Others slapped his back, telling him he was a legend. But just as many voices turned sharp. He's making the school look bad. He probably set Whitaker up. Now everybody's playing the race card. The admiration felt shallow. The hate felt louder. Marcus carried both like weights, one pulling him upward, the other pressing him down. At home, his mother fielded calls from reporters and community members, her voice guarded. She refused interviews but spoke firmly to Marcus each night. This isn't just about us anymore, she said. People are watching. How you carry yourself matters now more than ever. His grandmother prayed louder than usual, asking God to protect Marcus from envy and lies. Marcus sat silently at the table, the glow of the TV flashing news clips of his own face. He had become both symbol and target. The administration scrambled to contain the scandal. An email went out to parents. We are committed to a fair and equitable environment. An investigation is underway. But whispers inside the school told another story. Teachers avoided mentioning Whitaker in class. Students debated in hushed tones. 2 weeks later, the official word came. Mr. Whitaker was being placed on administrative leave. No details given, no apology offered, just a quiet removal, as though erasing him from the building would erase the wound he'd left behind. When Marcus heard the announcement, a strange emptiness settled over him. Part of him had wanted this moment proof that he had been wronged, proof that Whitaker's cruelty had consequences. But instead of triumph, there was hollowness. The scars didn't fade, just because Whitaker was gone. He still felt the stares in the hallway. He still overheard whispers questioning whether he deserved his place in AP Calculus. Victory felt bittersweet when the system resisted real change. Dr. Alvarez checked in often, reminding him of the symposium. "Don't let this define you, Marcus. Let it launch you," he said one afternoon over the phone. "The world is bigger than Willow Creek. Trust me." Marcus clung to those words. He buried himself in preparation, not for Whitaker anymore, but for himself, for the future Alvarez had cracked open before him. Yet, even as he worked, he couldn't escape the reminder that his brilliance had come at a cost. Friendships had shifted. His once safe hallways now felt like battlegrounds. His story, twisted by headlines and opinions, no longer fully belonged to him. One afternoon as he walked home from school, he passed two adults standing near the fence line. Their voices carried, sharp against the autumn air. "They're turning him into some kind of hero," one muttered. "It's ridiculous. That teacher gave his life to this school." "Doesn't matter," the other replied. "The truth's out. Maybe it's about time someone called it what it is." Marcus kept walking, his backpack heavy, his jaw clenched. Hero or scapegoat, neither felt like the truth. He was just a boy who wanted to be seen for what he was, a mathematician, not a battle line. That night, as his mother sorted mail at the kitchen table, she set one envelope aside. It was thicker than the rest, its corner stamped with the crest of a prestigious university. She slid it across to Marcus without a word. He stared at it, his breath catching. His fingers trembled as he tore the seal. Inside was a letter, its words formal but glowing. A scholarship offer, full tuition, recognition of outstanding mathematical talent and resilience. Marcus's vision blurred. His grandmother reached for his hand, her voice breaking as she whispered, "See? God's got you, baby." His mother's eyes filled with tears, pride and relief pouring through her exhaustion. "They can't stop you," she said softly. "Not now, not ever." Marcus clutched the letter, his heart swelling. For the first time, the weight on his chest eased. But even in that moment of triumph, a shadow lingered. He knew the scholarship wasn't just a door, it was a spotlight, and with it came more scrutiny, more expectations, more battle. As Marcus folded the letter carefully, he realized his fight wasn't over. The world was watching now, and how he carried this next chapter could change everything. The envelope with the scholarship letter sat on Marcus's desk for days, its presence both comforting and daunting. Each time he glanced at it, he felt the weight of everything that had led him there. The night spent scribbling until his hands cramped, the humiliation on the board, the whispers that tried to shrink him, the notebook filled with cruel caricatures. All of it had shaped the moment, now resting in that folded piece of paper. But even with the scholarship in hand, Marcus couldn't shake the memories that clung to him like shadows. He found himself replaying his first day of senior year, the way Mr. Whitaker had smirked as he called him to the board, the way the class had stared, waiting for him to fail. That humiliation had been his starting line. And here he was, months later, standing at a very different finish line, but carrying scars only he could feel. The school moved on quickly, or pretended to. Whitaker's absence was rarely spoken about in official terms. Teachers sidestepped questions, and students gossiped in fragments. But the chalkboard in room 204 remained, smooth and clean, a silent witness to everything. Marcus returned there one afternoon, after the final bell, when the hallways were quiet. He slipped inside, his footsteps soft against the tile. The room was empty, the desks neatly lined, the faint smell of marker ink lingering. He walked to the front slowly, his eyes fixed on the chalkboard. He reached for a piece of chalk, the same kind Whitaker had once handed him with a smirk, daring him to crumble. His hand trembled, not with fear, but with memory. He pressed the chalk to the board and began to write, not a problem this time, but a message. Line after line, symbols and words flowed together, a mix of math and reflection, proof and poetry. He wrote equations that curved into statements of truth, limits that led into declarations of belonging. When he stepped back, the board wasn't just covered in math, it was covered in Marcus's voice, carved in chalk. You belong. Numbers don't lie. Truth shines. The phrases glowed against the dark surface, stark and defiant. His grandmother's words echoed in his ears. You carry us when you walk into that classroom. He thought of his mother, her hands raw from work, but her pride unshaken. He thought of Dr. Alvarez, whose belief had widened the horizon. He thought of every student who had whispered encouragement, and every one who had whispered doubt. This board had once been his stage of humiliation. Now it was his canvas of triumph. The next morning, students entered room 204 and stopped short. The board still bore Marcus's writing. Some read it silently, their eyes widening. Others smirked, muttering, "Too dramatic." But a few paused longer, something shifting in their expressions as they took it in. Marcus sat at his desk, quiet, not needing to explain. The board spoke louder than he ever could. As the weeks passed, the media coverage faded. The community divided itself into camps. Those who believed Marcus had exposed a painful truth about the system, and those who clung stubbornly to the idea that Whitaker had been wronged. Victory didn't erase division. It only revealed it. Marcus carried that knowledge carefully. He didn't pretend the scholarship solved everything, or that his triumph made the world fairer overnight. He knew better. But he also knew this. He had survived. He had refused to be erased. On the night before graduation, Marcus stood by his window, the city lights flickering beyond. His grandmother dozed in her chair, her Bible resting in her lap. His mother was still at work, the sound of her keys jangling in his memory. Marcus held the scholarship letter in his hands, folded and unfolded until the creases wore thin. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "I belong." And for the first time, the words didn't feel like defiance. They felt like truth. At graduation, when his name was called, the gymnasium erupted with applause. Some loud, some reluctant, some silent. He walked across the stage, his steps steady, his shoulders squared. The diploma in his hand was more than paper. It was proof of endurance, of brilliance, of survival. Later, as cameras flashed and families crowded the gym floor, Marcus found himself staring back at the chalkboard in his mind. The same one that had once humiliated him now symbolized his journey. From shame to brilliance, from silence to voice. And yet, even in triumph, he couldn't ignore the question lingering at the edges of his mind. How many others never get this far? How many voices had been silenced before they could rise? How many students had quit when the system whispered they didn't belong? He looked around at his classmates, their faces bright with possibility, and wondered how many carried scars invisible to the world. The truth of his journey was undeniable. But it wasn't just his story. It was a reflection of countless others. As Marcus walked out into the sunlight, diploma in hand, the question burned in him like fire. Would society finally learn, or would the cycle continue with another student, another chalkboard, another silence waiting to be broken? And if Marcus's fight moved you, remember his struggle is not just his own. It's the fight of every voice told they don't belong. Type yes if you believe brilliance should never be silenced, and subscribe if his story broke your heart.